Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Here is Trek It. Welcome. This music gets me in the mood. You can dance to this. Tell me what you can and can't dance. All right, everybody. Welcome to Trek It. Let me turn down our mute music here, and let me get Mr. Nicholas Lamar Suter on the screen. Hello, Mr. Suter. How are you, sir?
Hi, I'm very good. We haven't done this in far too long.
I know. We had a little fake out there. I'm not entirely sure what just happened because I don't know. YouTube told me that I was live and then I wasn't live. Very strange, but that's okay. We basically rehearsed the first few minutes of the show together.
Yeah, we're living that loop episode of Star Trek where it's just you keep going back and you keep doing the same thing. So in about 5-10 minutes, we're just going to start. This show was on time. We started.
The show was on time. I don't know what happened there. That episode is called Cause and Effect.
That's right. Yes.
Yes, Cause and Effect. Star Trek Next Generation.
That's right.
5th season, I believe.
And Fraser comes in at the end.
He does.
Fraser comes in at the end.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah, I said that. You kind of blew that off, but I was right about that.
You were. Okay, so this is my new show, Trek It, which is a way to get away from all of the crap that's going on, and a way to relax and deflate and talk about Star Trek instead of talking about all of the horrible, horrendous things that happen all the time. As always, your messages are front and center, and the great and wonderful Batsy will be putting them up on the screen for us. Batsy, you can do that whenever you want. As always, we'd like to say thank you to Batsy for everything that she does here on the channel by just putting the letter B in chat. You see people putting the letter B in chat, that's what they're doing. They're just saying thank you to Batsy. That's our way of doing that. Okay, real quick show moment. Last night on the channel, I interviewed Sokka Count for the beginning of my other series, Requiem for the GDC, and I encourage everybody to go check that out if you are in any way connected to the GDC or care about the GDC and care about its rise and its demise. Great interview, and next week the Holy Spackle will be joining me for the second episode, and the week after that, Christopher Mowdy will be joining me, and we'll talk about the Requiem for the GDC. And then after the show tonight, over on Twitch, I will be doing my gaming thing for a while as a kind of an after-show thing. You are welcome to join me, twitch.tv/prolib. We're up to... What's up?
Oh, we got to start over.
vMix Social is canceling on you? Okay. I will try to restart vMix Social. So that what now? Oh, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, sure. Sorry, Batsy likes to produce in the middle of the show. No, I can definitely do that. It's no problem. She's having problems putting your messages up on the screen because vMix is wonky sometimes. Okay,
it's
so
vMix.
Yes, it is. Yes, after the show, I'll be gaming over on Twitch, so join me over there, twitch.tv/prolib. We're at like 48 followers. I need to get to 50 so that I can do the affiliate thing on Twitch. So it'd be great. We get a couple of people come over there, and we like to play. We've been playing Civilization 6 and Divinity Original Sin 2. So I don't know which one we'll play tonight, but we'll play one of them. We'll let people decide in the chat what we're going to play. All right, Mr. Suter, if you could give us a rundown of your history with Star Trek and how you got into Star Trek and all that good stuff.
I loved the original show. Was just a little bit before my time. It was still in reruns when I just started watching it. I'd seen most of the episodes, not all of it. I really enjoyed it. I remember when the Next Generation came on, and I was really hoping it would be good. And I was like, I don't think it's going to live up to the original, and I didn't. And I loved it. I thought it was spectacular. And I went back and ended up watching all the original series episodes because I hadn't really seen them all. This was before, I was going to say TiVo, which really dates me. This was before internet or anything like that. So you really could only watch whatever was being rerun. Right. There was no way to. So, but you had to make a serious effort to try to actually watch the shows.
Sure.
But I ended up, I watched all of the Next Generation, every episode. Watched Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine was on while I was in college. And that one, I don't know. That one, I liked it, but that one sort of felt a little hit or miss to me. So did Voyager. I think Voyager certainly got a very bad rap at the start, and then I think it started to really get strong. And then I haven't seen any television shows fully through other than Dora the Explorer, and I wish that was a joke. I haven't seen any episodes of anything really fully through since Lost. Lost was the last series so people keep telling me you got to watch Discovery, and I've got it. I've got every episode of Discovery. We've got the streaming services. And I just haven't had time. I haven't had time, especially since the COVID thing. I'm educating my kids, so we've got to do it's crazy. So I want to see that, and I really want to see Picard, and so that's it. But I've been a huge fan of it since then, and I think I had mentioned earlier too that I think we already had this conversation where we are really in a temporal causality loop. I know. I think like I said, I'm also a fan of Star Wars, but I think they're two very, very different beasts, and but that's it. So, and I've been to a few of the conventions. I was to Robert Picardo's very first convention, and
really?
He was a speaker there. That was great. Yeah. And it was funny because that was right before the episode where he had to perform on the gel packs, and he didn't really want to give it away, but he's just like, well, I have to do something I've never done before. And he starts talking about it. Finally, by the time he's done, he's like, well, let's just say it's a piece of the ship that's actually alive. I'm like, oh, okay, so it's the gel packs. But
right.
That and James Doohan was a blast. He was great at the conventions. He would do what would Scotty be like if he were, and then he'd just go through, and he could do Australia. He was great with accents, and so he would just do a whole 10-15 minute riff on Scotty from Australia, Scotty from New Zealand, Scotty from the UK, Scotty. He did a Cockney Scotty, which was hilarious.
That's great.
So I used to do the conventions a lot too, and that's it. So like I said, and I told you before, I have somewhere, I couldn't find it, The Physics of Star Trek, which I really enjoyed. That was by I think that was by Green, who also does books on quantum mechanics and does real interesting work. And then also The Tao of Star Trek, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, so that's my history.
That would be interesting to read. I want to check that out. Real quick, we have a super chat from I'm Sorry Wilson, $5, says, there are two kinds of people, those who think Picard is superior to Kirk, and those who are stupid and wrong. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because I had already planned to make the second episode of Trek It, who is the better captain, Picard versus Kirk. Oh. So that's it's kind of funny that you did that, because the next episode of Trek It is going to surround Picard v. Kirk. And then someone else said something. Sock Account, actually, speaking of Sock Account, said, Picard is superior to Kirk, but let's be honest, first season of TNG was hot garbage. I agree. However, I'm sorry, Wilson then said TNG didn't get off ground until season 3. I disagree. It's halfway through season 2. halfway through season 2. You should check out The Politics of Star Trek, because episode 2 of The Politics of Star Trek goes into that a little bit. But Q-Who especially, which was season 2 of Star Trek Next Generation, fantastic episode. So John Peterson asks, what do you think is the greatest TNG episode? Nick, what do you think the greatest TNG episode is?
Oh, Jesus, that's a really good question. Oh, my God, the greatest TNG episode. Let me think about that and see if I can come up with one by the end. I can't think of... I will say this. I remember, I don't think it was the greatest episode, but it was certainly up there, and it was a cliffhanger that, I mean, made national news. This made national news when it came out, was the cliffhanger to, I think it was season 6, Best of Both Worlds, where...
That's seasons 3 into 4. Come on now.
Oh my God! Wow. Okay, so yeah, I'm way off. But hey, I got the name right.
Season 6 cliffhanger was Descent. That was Descent. That was season 6 into season 7.
Wow.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
The stuff that's
I'm on here just to get smacked around a bit of the whole show. Okay. So So the Best of Both Worlds, which I ended up getting the soundtrack to that on CD because I loved the music to it. But the that cliffhanger, and when the next episode aired, the start of the next episode after that, when the next season began, there was a baby that had been trapped in a well, and they've been trying to get the baby out for a while. And when the baby got out, it was somewhere in the Midwest that made national news, and so they interrupted. It was an interesting thing because there was a huge, Star Trek fans, we're all progressive, we're all like, okay,
sure.
Your kids get rescued all the time. We want to see what happens. Does Captain Picard get rescued? Oh my God, it was crazy.
And you bring something up that we're going to discuss tonight is just how one of the things we're going to discuss tonight is just how progressive Star Trek really is. Baby Jessica. Lady Starfire says, "Baby Jessica."
That was it. It was Baby Jessica. That was it. That was it. Baby Jessica.
I'm sorry. Wilson says Tapestry is the best TNG episode, and that Clues is really good too. Clues is really good. I mean, Tapestry is fantastic.
Tapestry. Tapestry. Okay, so Tapestry is the one where he gets stabbed through the heart.
Right.
And then Clues. Clues was good. To tell you the truth, one of my favorite, Brothers, I like a lot, and one of my probably my single favorite scene of all Star Trek episodes is Data essentially taking over the Enterprise and his escape from the bridge, because I just love the mechanical nature of that. Just he's got the whole thing planned, right. And no matter what anybody does, as he's got to get out of the bridge, he's got the oxygen's out, nobody can get in. But they think they can't keep, and it's just. But also, because of that episode, I memorized all of the words and lyrics to Abdul Abul Amir.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's.
I haven't sung it in a while, but
sure. But that's still impressive. The sons of the
prophet were brave men and bold, and quite unaccustomed to fear. Yeah, but bravest of all, or so I am told, was Abdul Abul Amir.
And this is why you watch Trek. I memorized the whole thing. Nowhere else can you hear Nick Suter sing.
No, I haven't sung anywhere else. That's the first time
that happened to you.
I've sung on. There you go.
All right, so I want to kind of get into our topic for the evening, which is about the philosophy of Star Trek. You, of course, have a much...
may I interrupt for one thing? Because
sure.
I just saw and I wore this shirt also in honor of it.
Yeah.
Now, this is a quote of Stephen Hawking, but the person who made this shirt was Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Move to your right just slightly.
Okay. Okay. Because
because you're cropped a little bit.
There you go.
Yeah, I love it. I really do. I will show my shirt if I can. It
Vulcan.
says Vulcan Massage. And it's Kirk, and he says that's the spot. So that's what I wore tonight. Yeah, The Inner Light is a fantastic episode, Saka. You're absolutely correct. Okay, so the philosophy of Star Trek, we see it now, so many decades after the first show aired, of course. But there was a lot of muddled things going on when Star Trek was first being planned. It wasn't as cohesive an idea of optimism as what the final result ended up being. And you gave me some interesting details about that the other night as we were talking over our topic. Could you go into a little bit about the origins and how they developed a little bit?
Well, sure. Well, in fact, actually, too. So first of all, as most people know, it was actually going to be much more progressive than it really was. The first officer was supposed to be a woman right off the bat. That was, and in fact, in the pilot was, but that got changed. It was supposed to be also a little bit grittier, a little bit more like what DS9 ended up being, and that got sort of smoothed over. The other thing was there was a huge push from the network to Gene Roddenberry to put on a ship's minister. And he said absolutely not, and he had a number of objections to it. I said, well, wait a minute, who's going to look after the spiritual, needs of this crew? And he actually, even at the time, wanted a ship's counselor. Nobody went for that, so he said, okay, we'll just make that we'll make sort of a bartender, and if we can't have a bartender, that'll be the doctor, and that's what ended up happening with Bones. But he the ship's minister was one that, and he said, look, first of all, he was actually, now there's a philosopher friend of his who said he wasn't an atheist. He was probably a deist. He certainly didn't believe in a theistic God, the God of Abraham, and railed against it quite a bit, even publicly. Even then, said things like, well, now he had grown up Southern Baptist, and just Baptist. At any rate, he had. He refused to do it because he said, look, we're not going to get out of, we're not going to leave the cradle unless we can get over our religious differences. And that's not going to happen even so long as there is religion. This idea that there's, you know what, I declare God said it, so there's no arguing against me. There's no,
right.
And the only way that we're going to be in outer space is if we overcome that. And think about it this way, once you get out, if there's other life forms, the Bible loses almost all meaning, because the whole point of the Bible is the universe exists for us. If there's other intelligent life out there, religion's gone. So he wanted it to have a little bit more anti-theistic, and I actually had, let me do just a couple of quick quotes.
Sure.
Because it's just some stuff that people don't even realize he had said. Let's see. Let's see. Well, that's about. No, no, I can't find any of the religious quotes. Okay, it said, we must question the story logic of having an all-knowing and all-powerful God who creates faulty humans and then blames them for his own creation. That wasn't the one that was, what was the one I was looking for?
Ouch.
I condemn prophets. Yeah, I condemn prophets. I condemn the efforts to take away the power of rational decision, to drain people of their free will, and a hell of a lot of money in the bargain. Religions vary in their degree to idiocy, but I reject them all for the most part, because religion is nothing more than a substitute for a malfunctioning brain. So that was Gene Roddenberry. He refused, and the network was almost willing to cancel the show over the fact that he wasn't going to have a minister on the the Enterprise. So that was, I think that was. And then there was obviously a lot of changes, and I think it sort of evolved a bit more, especially once it started getting into the movies as to where he wanted to go.
The network asked him to make certain changes to Spock's appearance after the pilot because they felt he looked too demonic. They didn't like it because Vulcan's eyebrows don't go down. It's very subtle, but Vulcan eyebrows go up, and they'll shave the second half of the eyebrows, and they put false eyebrows on the actors. And they felt that the slanted eyebrows and the pointed ears made them look too demonic. There was also, as you mentioned, there was number one that was played by Majel Barrett, who ended up marrying Gene Roddenberry, who was the female first officer.
And then became the computer.
And then became the computer, and then became Deanna Troy's mother, Lwaxana Troy, and appeared in TNG and Deep Space Nine episodes.
Nurse Chapel.
Not my favorite character, but...
Oh, wait, she was Nurse Chapel she was Nurse Chapel, wasn't she?
No, Nurse Chapel was...
No, you're right. Why
Nurse Chapel. I can't think of her name. If you hadn't asked me, I could have told you. One of those moments. But
Sorry. Yeah.
yeah. So it was this weird dichotomy when it first started that they were both a little bit more gritty, and then they were more progressive. And the other thing about the first series that I think it lost a bit after that the first season of Next Generation, was that it was really a lot of sci-fi horror. There was a lot of, the episode where they steal Spock's brain. There's a salt monster that sucks all of the water out of your body in an instant. There's the moment where they meet Admiral Pike, and he's been mutilated, and he's stuck in this chair. There's a lot of horror aspects. All of the red shirts that die and get vaporized and get killed by, whatever monster of the week. And I think the first season of TNG was continuing that. You've got the episode with the parasites that are inside all of this, the admiral's bodies and everything that they end up killing. The pilot with Q, Encounter at Farpoint. They put Q puts humanity on trial, and it's the darkest. He takes them back in time to the darkest period of human history, where there's martial law all over the country and the world, and the streets are run by police that are basically thugs that are amped up on these drugs that make them very aggressive, and they're put on the show trial. So it's these very dark horror kind of aspects, and he did that to contrast it more with the optimistic viewpoint of Star Trek. Can you talk a little bit about why humans as a whole are attracted to both the optimistic side and the dark side of Star Trek, in your opinion, at least?
Oh, Jesus. That's a good question. I will say, I think you're right. It started to, in the middle of the Next Generation, they really started to take a turn into that, like the ghost that was haunting Dr. Crusher's family, the one where they're all being kidnapped into another dimension, and also the one where Riker's putting on the play, and he's basically going insane throughout this.
Right.
So they definitely did start to sort of the middle of the Next Generation. They really started to go into that. Almost discomforting for myself. I think it's different for everybody. I think there are people who like one aspect more than the other, or not than some people. I do think you're right. I think it creates this extra tension and highlights you can see the bright colors of a painting easiest against the dark colors.
Sure.
I think that contrast makes it a lot easier to see what it is that they're trying to show. I think, again, for me, the intellectual components of it is what I always liked the most, but it was also very challenging viscerally. And the brain creatures in the first ones that would literally, would create a prison in your mind, and they got these throbbing, veins on their heads. That I think there were a lot of people who are viscerally attracted to that element as well. I think that it gets the blood pumping, it gets you, sort of agitated. Nowadays, it looks kind of silly compared to the graphic, but I think it's the same reason some people watch horror movies. But I think I wouldn't be an expert past. I think what I've just sort of given there. I think you're right. It's the contrast, and I think also, but different people watch the show for different reasons, and there wasn't anything really that shocking and bold, I think, at the time. I think it was really cutting edge.
Yeah, I mean, even when we think about the episode we were discussing a little bit ago, or they were in the chat, The Inner Light, for those that don't know, a probe scans the Enterprise, and it finds itself compatible with Captain Picard. It puts him into basically a coma, and while he's in a coma for less than an hour, he lives an entire lifetime on the planet of the creators of the probe. And it turns out that was how they decided to communicate with other races. Their planet was destroyed. through a natural disaster. Basically, their sun I think supernovaed, and it was getting hotter and hotter on their planet. And they decided to send this probe up into space to educate other people on their civilization, even though their civilization was gone. And when you think about that, that's a really horrific thing, that some piece of technology could just take over your brain and fool you into thinking you've lived an entire lifetime in the span of an hour, essentially. And when Picard wakes up, he's very disoriented. Well, first of all, when he's inside the simulation, whatever it is, he's very disoriented, and at first he's trying to contact a ship, and then he kind of assumes this life, and they call him Galen, and he raises children and raises grandchildren, and he's instrumental in creating the probe and figuring out with his daughter what's going on with the planet, why the weather is changing. That's a scary thing to think about, that something could just take over your mind and force you to live out a simulation that's not connected to your real life. Those aspects of Star Trek are I think glossed over sometimes, but when you really think about it, that's terrifying.
Well, it's actually seen as a blessing well, first of all, you got to keep the flute from that one, which was and the flute comes back in another episode. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was they do roughly the same thing to O'Brien, and it's seen as a blessing because O'Brien on DS9 is convicted of a crime. I forget what the crime was. He ends up. I
don't remember either.
Yeah,
something
so he gets
fairly
convicted
minor.
of a crime.
It was like negligence or something.
Yeah, and then, but rather than have him actually live out his sentence, they decide. So what they do is they say, okay, look, it's unfair to have people have to live out their sentence like a year, 2 years, 3 years in prison. Disrupts your family, disrupts all these other things. So he lives it out in his mind. So it takes only about an hour, but in that hour, he lives an entire prison sentence, including, it's this terrible experience, including he ends up getting paranoid while he's in prison. He kills his cellmate who was actually trying to help him. And he goes through this huge traumatic experience, and then he wakes up, like, okay, your sentence is done. And he's just like, wait, I'm back on the station. What's going on? Like, oh, no, it was all imaginary. You lived your sentence out, but it only took an hour. And I thought that brought up a lot of philosophical. I mean, that brought up Asimov actually had a very similar question, put it from a different means insofar as learning. If a child could take a pill and live an entire 4 years experience of high school, actually live the experience just by taking a pill. Who's more like Wesley? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's that.
I love that question.
That's a long. That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a whole stream, I think.
Yes, I think that is. Anyways, I don't. The only episode that I ever really found disturbing, I was kind of disturbed by the one where Crusher is haunted by the ghost. Oh yeah, the nightmare. I think it's called. There was a whole block where they were just doing. So the one where Troy's mother. Speaking of, so Loxana Troy had been traumatized, and so she's living out these nightmares and she's projecting them onto people. But then there's the one that I really found disturbing was they're all having nightmares, and they start to realize that their nightmares are kind of related, and they've all experienced something while they're asleep, and what's happening is they're being abducted into another dimension, and Riker reconstructs on the holodeck the table. They've got the dissection, and they're all essentially being dissected in their sleep. That one I thought was a little disturbing. That was a bit much for me, but I mean, past that, I thought, yeah, that was, I thought, the most disturbing one, even more than Inner Light. Although Inner Light, the other thing that you got to ask yourself though is how does he recover? I mean, he recovers from when he wakes up again. He sort of doesn't quite remember anybody's name. It's been decades for him, and then somehow he's got to go back to being captain. Okay. But that's one of the things. I mean, it really did ask a lot of very difficult questions. The other one that I thought was interesting Wasn't one of my favorite episodes insofar as an actual episode, but really got you thinking was the one where they Riker, like 10 or 15 years prior, had been beamed out of a planet, and there was these storms, and his signal started to fade. They brought in a double signal. They boosted it. They didn't need the boost. He shows up back on the pad. Everything's okay. They're going back there. He's going to go back to the station. They've got a brief window to go back, and he's the only guy who's around and knows what's going on at the station. So he shows up, and they find a carbon copy of him. And what had happened was the signal got bounced back. The boost got bounced back, and he got recreated. So you now have two Rikers. And it operates very much on this sort of theory of, there isn't, our minds are our brains, and so they were at that exact moment absolutely identical, but they've lived different lives, they've changed, and there was a moment in it that I really enjoyed. At that point he had been dating the ship's counselor, Troy, and the one on the planet that got stranded there for 12 years was still dating her, and didn't realize that of course the copy had broken up with her, and they fell apart. And he's back, and he wants to get back together with her, and she's like, "Wow, this is a second chance." And the Riker is kind of a little, it's weird. He's got this exact duplicate of him that is him running around. But at one point, I like this because this gets into determinism, free will. How do we define who's who? But at one point, she's starting to get romanced by the one
Thomas Riker. Right.
Thank you. That was going by the middle initial or middle name. So she's being romanced by Thomas, and she's really starting to fall for him. yeah. Drag's got a point. So she's getting romanced by him, and then Will says, you really want to be careful there. She's like, oh, why? Things are going great. This is who you should have been. No, this is who I would have been if I had stayed there. And if the signals had been switched, that would be me. And he'd have made the exact same choices. Mm-hmm. So you're still dating the same guy. And I thought and then it just dawns on her. It's the same guy who made the same choices once he got off. It was very interesting. Anyways, I think I digressed off of the question.
It's okay. Jake 40 sent us a super chat. $5 says Picard was supposed to teach about that civilization. However, it doesn't appear he did. P.S. O'Brien was convicted of espionage. Espionage is what it was. I was thinking negligence. I couldn't remember. Espionage. That's right. We don't see Picard teach about the civilization until I think it's the next season when he starts dating a senior science officer, a geologist, and takes her up and teaches her the song from the Inner Light and is playing the flute. And one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek where he's sitting there doing this with the flute in his mouth, and it's obviously somebody else's hands actually playing the flute. One of the campiest scenes you will ever see in Star Trek. But, so we also have a question here from Dr. Misha Griffin that I would like to address. Worst episode, Spectre of the Gun or Spock's Brain?
Good question.
Spock's Brain is bad. It's a really bad episode. It's like Ed Wood does Star Trek.
Almost half of them were like that too. I mean, I think that's the one thing that I do think that there is this tendency to romanticize the entire series. And I realized, there were some episodes that just didn't work for whatever reason,
Right.
Although Mud was spectacular. Mud was one of those characters that just some great writing for Mud in The Trouble with Tribbles. Just in terms of a character, God, I don't know how. You do him to death if you brought him back too many times. He only came back one other time, but
sure.
Then I'm still trying to answer which one was my favorite, and I'm just trying to think. You know what? That's the most obvious question. I'd really need to probably. Definitely. I really don't know which one would be my favorite. Like I said, for me, a lot of times it's individual scenes that I really like. Again, in Brothers, where Data just takes over the Brothers, I think would have been spectacular, but there was a little too much moralizing with the brother in the who almost died, and he was in their equivalent to ICU.
You know, I think Spectre of the Gun is one of those episodes where they were. TV used to be a lot different, right? You had to do a certain amount of episodes each season to fill time, because the network said, you know, we've got this time slot and we're planning out for these many months and we're selling the time to advertisers, so you have to produce this many episodes. So when you have these strict budgetary restrictions, sometimes you're like, listen, we got to do an episode for like $10,000. What do we got? And someone's like, oh, well, no one's using the Wild West set over on lot 10. And they've got some costumes that'll probably fit our actors. We can send them down to the seamstress, and they can do 4 hours of work and make them fit well enough. Okay, cool. Well, let's do a Wild West episode. You know, Spectre of the Gun's not...
Episodes of the Wild Wild West include The Night of the Plague.
Hey, Google.
Computer. Why are you answering questions when I...
So Spectre of the Gun's not... I would say Spock's Brain is worse. Like, Spectre of the Gun, it was obvious that it was just a budgetary thing. Like, we got to do a couple episodes real cheap, guys. What do we do? And they're back there, you know, smoking cigars. I don't know. Let's use Lot 10. Yeah, Lot 10, Wild West episode, sure. It'll be a shootout at the OK Corral. Oh, it's a great idea. And they wrote it over a weekend, and they started production on Monday morning, and William Shatner was like, oh, shit am I doing this week? So that was Spectre of the Gun. It's not a great episode, but Spock's Brain it's worse. Spock's Brain is worse.
You just got. I do have a favorite DS9 episode.
Oh,
and
real
you got
quick.
Me thinking about this because yes.
Real quick before we go to that, I just want to read Andrew's message because he brings up a really good point. Spock's Brain is pretty dire. It's sexist, ill-judged, looks cheap, and its underlying premise is beyond absurd. Yes. Also, there's a lot of sexism in it. There's a ton of sexism all through the original series. There's an episode where Kirk, where this female, I think it's a female alien, but she switches bodies with Kirk, and Kirk gets too emotional to run the Enterprise, but the Kirk that's in the woman's body is also, like, too weak to run the episode. Like, it's super sexist. Like, if we start talking about which episodes of Star Trek are sexist, we'll be here all... Yes, there's a lot of sexism. In the original series, it tapers off. There's an episode of Deep Space Nine I was watching the other day from the first season, which I'm going to do a whole episode of Trek It on, which has a whole bunch of gay panic in it. A bunch of gay panic. I'm going to do a whole episode of Trek It on it. Anyway, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Well, actually, that gets me. I do think that the original intent of Star Trek was better than that, because remember, again, the first officer was female, and there was no distinction in terms of, like, command style, no disrespect, I mean, she operated as any other, and it was a spectacular first episode. It's just you had to see it. You had to see the pilot as the menagerie, but. Duet is, I think, my favorite episode of DS9. So the DS9 is centered around this Cardassian occupation of Bajor, where they basically gassed and killed all the Bajorans and genocide, and there was a resistance against the Bajorans. And they catch a guy who is sick with an illness that only people who were at a forced work camp could possibly have. And at first it's thought he must be Bajoran. Turns out he's Cardassian, which means he worked at that camp. And they're trying to figure out who he was at the camp, and as they zero in on his identity, they realize he was probably the guy who ran the camp and ordered the deaths of just hundreds of thousands of Bajorans. And so Kira, who is this resistance fighter and is trying to sort of keep her humanity as she's dealing with this guy who has no remorse about the people he's killed, and he's slaughtered loads of them, and talks about how he thinks he's a hero and all these other things. And she's realizing she doesn't like any Cardassians. She thinks they're all horrible and all this. But there's still some inconsistencies in their story. And finally Odo figures out it's not him. It's not the guy. it's his secretary. And his secretary felt so guilty over everything that had happened that once nobody could actually get any sort of justice for the guy who ran the camp, assumed his identity so that he could appease his own guilt and be punished for what everyone else there did. And she realizes he's innocent, and he refuses to be released. She says, "No, we're releasing you." And as he gets released, he gets murdered for what the other guy had done. And she's just like, "Why'd you kill him? Well, he's a Cardassian. They're all evil." And that was just the exact argument she had made earlier. She's realizing, no, they're not. So I think it's called Duet. But the reason I brought that up was because that episode, which I think is one of the best they ever made, wasn't originally going to happen. And what they did was they needed a ship in a bottle episode, or an episode in a bottle. And what those are episodes that can be done for no money. It's just whatever. They don't go anywhere. They just everything comes to them, and they just do it there. They don't have to get on ships. They don't have to fly or do anything. No special effects. It's just people talking. And they said, we're over budget. We need an episode like that. They wrote this one. There you go.
John Peterson says, remember when Will Riker got jiggy with the female leader of a planet where women were the superior gender? Yes, I do remember that. I also remember the an episode that has some really interesting transphobia themes, where he falls in love with an alien who their planet doesn't allow anyone to have any gender, but this particular alien feels female and wants to represent as female. And Jonathan Frakes has said he wished that it had been a male actor instead of a female actor, because he thought that would have made more a better contrast, and it would have had more poignancy. Yeah. But yeah, in the late 80s, early 90s, that wasn't going to happen, because they were kissing and stuff like that. They would not have put that on television, unfortunately.
First interracial kiss.
Sure,
Michelle Nichols and
and William Shatner, yes, but it was forced on them. It was an alien forcing them to kiss. It wasn't like the first lesbian kiss in Deep Space Nine, which had different implications. Yeah, and Star Trek, it's interesting because it's got those interesting dichotomies all through all the different series. Maybe not as much in Discovery and Picard, since they're so recent, but all the way up through Enterprise. Enterprise, dealt with some things along those lines too. What, in your opinion, is it about science fiction, especially, that allows us to explore some of these themes when it'd be harder to in other places?
So the book I'm best known for is actually a science fiction piece. It's called The Water Thief. It's a near future dystopia. I as a writer, it's interesting. I get people who sit there and say, "Oh, I hate fiction. I'd rather read things that actually happen, this and that." But fiction allows you to explore things that you can't really explore in real life. So, George Orwell is, in my view, one of the best sort of examples of this, with Animal Farm certainly, but also 1984. 1984 has become a huge part of the American lexicon. I mean, everyone knows what doublethink is. Everybody knows, or doublespeak as well. Everybody knows what Big Brother is. And these are concepts that actually have existed before. He was really critiquing Stalin, but he was able to do it in such a way that when we see Kim Jong-un behaving a certain way, or when we see our own president behaving a certain way, we can sit there and say, okay, that looks familiar to these writings that I've seen before and things that didn't happen, but it rang true in some way, was able to create a story that Lord of the Flies is another great example. Lord of the Flies is one of my favorites, and it's considered science fiction. It takes place in the future. There's some unknown war, and these boys are and you can watch society devolve. And I think the reality is, it's actually even fiction, even nonfiction, it always has to be written from a perspective, and always has to be there isn't as much truth in nonfiction as I think people think there is. And Mark Twain said you should never sacrifice a good story for the truth. And I think when you acknowledge that you're gonna allow for the play of time travel, of different dimensions, of people swapping bodies, and all these things that you can do in any science fiction series, all of a sudden, Dark City was a decent movie. It certainly, I thought, addressed some interesting. Inception is a movie I like a great deal. So you can do things in these and ask questions that you can't comfortably ask in other venues. So I think that's why I think it's one of the things that made Star Trek. And in Star Trek, you could sit there in Star Trek and have interracial kissing. You could have people in roles that culturally, I mean, also even just having, Sulu at the helm was considered scandalous. And
right.
I think that's hard to do in any other venue, to challenge people's ways of thinking. So I think that's one of the things that science fiction is very, very good at.
Sock Account sends us $5 Canadian on Canada Day, and happy Canada Day to Sock Account and all of our other neighbors to the north. Says, Klingons best race in Star Trek or best race across all science fiction? Discuss. It depends. Here's the thing about the Klingons. The Klingons in the original series were not the Klingons of Next Generation or later. They were just villains of the week. They were shady thugs, essentially. They didn't really come to prominence until the writers got to flesh out Worf in Next Generation and really add some meat to the Klingons as a whole. And then the Klingons in Discovery are intentionally more alien, I think, but they're also a little bizarre at times. I'm glad that in the second season of Discovery they kind of scaled some of that back, because they were too alien, they were too weird, and it was difficult to relate to them. Where what we definitely want with the alien races, we want them to contrast with our characters, our main characters, but we still want to have a line where we can relate to them, either by just saying, oh, these are terrible villains, or oh, I can understand their position, whatever it is. When it gets too alien and too weird, you're just like, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, whatever. Yeah, and then Puff had a question.
I want to do one thing with the Klingon thing, unless
sure.
I'm interrupting her.
While I find this, go for it.
So, Chicago, Illinois. Guy comes into the ER and has severe head trauma. Nobody can speak with him. Nobody's got any idea what's going on. They're trying to figure out how he got here. Nobody could figure it out. And they ask people who are in the waiting room, if anyone knows anything about languages. Nobody can figure out what the language is. Finally, somebody overhears it and says, "That's Klingon." What had happened was the guy received a traumatic brain injury and had lost the parts of speech of any language that you learned before the age of 4. Any language that you learned synthetically after that, he retained. He was incapable of speaking English, but he had learned Klingon at Star Trek conventions. He could speak fluent Klingon, but had forgotten English now. So that was the only language. So
weird.
The hospital actually had to hire a Klingon translator. I became aware of this when it was seen as a false expense. It got flagged, and they're like, "Why are we having a Klingon translator?" Sent to Chicago Memorial, because that was the only language the guy could speak. He couldn't speak English. All he could speak was Klingon. So they had to have a Klingon translator. Finally, could find out what happened to the guy.
Interesting. Okay, so Puff is asking about alcohol use, how alcohol use is okay in Star Trek, drug use isn't. And I think, Puff, the easy answer there is just sign of the times. The 90s especially were a decade of cracking down on drug use and expanding the drug war and stuff. I think it was just a response, unfortunately, to what was going on societally. Yeah, go ahead.
Call nerd technicality. Nobody in Star Trek drinks alcohol, with the exception of Scotty when he's drinking Romulan ale, and nobody drinks alcohol. It's synthahol, doesn't have the effect, and also nobody eats meat either. They're all vegetarians. The meat that's made in the replicators is actually vegetarian, so they're all vegetarians.
That changes in Deep Space Nine because there's a Klingon restaurant on Deep Space Nine, and they do eat like gach and stuff. That's actual.
Yeah, well, that's live. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, right. You can't. Yeah.
There was one other. Yes, Dr. Griffin says there were earlier kisses between the races on TV, but Trek fans wanted to make it special. I've heard that. No. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
There were, and in fact, I've got a list here. So,
right, because I don't know anything about this. I thought that it was, so please correct me.
First quote interracial kiss, but you see, here's why, and this is why I actually said between a man and an African American woman, because there was. The first one was actually I Love Lucy. That was between Lucy and Desi. They were married. Right. Desi was Hispanic, but is Hispanic considered a race? Is it Latin, Spanish, Filipino cultural? Is it a cultural background versus a race? So that doesn't always. If you're just talking first, complete interracial kiss, I Love Lucy is often given it. Adventures in Paradise had a sort of a similar thing. There was another one where Sammy Davis Jr. Kissed Nancy Sinatra, but that, while it was in fact the first Caucasian and African American kiss, it was on the cheek instead of lip to lips. So, do you call that a kiss or not? If you call that a kiss, because even though it was on the cheek, right. It was a kiss, but it was on the cheek, then the first time would be Movin' with Nancy, which was Nancy Sinatra and Sammy Davis. But because it wasn't on the lips, so I get to school the historian. I am recording this. This is the first and only time I am saving this. I am archiving it. Which comes back on In Time. I am going to play this the next time we disagree. But yeah, well, maybe when, okay. So at any rate, and then now the only minor issue with that kiss on Star Trek is that they actually turn slightly, so you can't tell if they make lip contact. Nichelle Nichols said, yes, they did. It was a real kiss. Shatner has actually on occasion said that, no, their lips didn't touch. It looks to me like they did. I don't know. At any rate, that is the first African-American and Caucasian interracial lip kiss on TV. There, Misha.
Jake 4D super chats $5 and says, Star Trek aliens are a one-dimensional slice of human personality. This works for exploring the human condition, but is there a better way to do aliens? Jake, before Nick answers, I'm sure he's going to have an opinion here, but I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. I think that when you're writing, especially something like television, which is a visual medium, you need to be able to relate to the characters. It's why you don't see the Tholians a lot. It's why you don't see... It's why you don't see the Iconians a lot, that are basically an energy being, because it's difficult for us to relate to them. There's a great episode of Voyager where B'Elanna Torres is attacked by a creature with which they have no way to understand its language. They have trouble understanding its endocrine and exocrine systems and how they work. It takes over B'Elanna's body essentially to keep itself alive, and they don't know what to do. At one point, they try to physically remove it from her, and it's starting to kill her because her body systems are starting to depend on its systems to survive. So, those kinds of episodes are like a one-off, but when you're going to have a continuing character or a continuing civilization, it's very difficult to have them as characters that are difficult for us as an audience to relate to. People just are going to lose interest. And unfortunately, there's always this underlying theme of you've got to get an audience, right? People have to watch the show for the show to survive, for advertiser dollars to come in and whatnot. And that's unfortunate, but how it's just how it goes. And as Dr. Griffin said, too many qualifiers.
Yeah, she did say history is qualifiers. Um, we'll debate that one. History is nothing but qualifiers in
Right.
my view. But all right, so I'm gonna agree with you. I think, look, in any, again, as a writer, I look at this as a writer. I've seen people write characters that where the antagonist is not relatable. And if you can't relate to the antagonist, it sounds like you shouldn't have to be able to relate to the antagonist. No, you do need to be able to relate to the antagonist. Otherwise, Elvish just left them. Otherwise, if you can't, you don't understand their motives, and you can't connect, and you're pulled out of the story. And I think it happens that way certainly with the aliens. So they have to have human elements to them. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to connect to them. I think Klingons, for a period of time, were very well done, and I thought, especially in DS9 early on. Well, not early on, especially after they added Worf in particular, they really made an effort to give them their own. And the Wesley asked Worf about women, and Worf was like, first, I think he said, first you read poetry, then, if you're lucky, she starts hurling heavy objects. So I actually, to tell you the truth, I think there was, when Tolkien did Lord of the Rings, one of the things he did was he wrote the entire Elvish language, and it's very easy to identify because of the verisimilitude. It's easy to identify the difference between a plot line, a character, or a species, or just any kind of cultural element, which you have expanded to fit the space in the story, versus one that's outside the story and that you have contracted to fit in the story. So he wrote the entire. He invented the entire Elvish language before he wrote the books. That means when he referenced the Elvish language, he was referencing stuff that already existed and had an internal consistency, and you could identify it. So you could tell easily. It felt like the Elvish language really existed because it actually did exist, and he had a lot to draw from already instead of having to invent it and make it and then fit it in later. So I think for a lot of, especially the next generation, it felt like they added Kalis, and they added this, and they added that as need, and they expanded the culture and the lore. But in DS9, especially in the middle, you felt like somebody sat down and said, okay, how do the Klingons operate? What's their real culture? And it started to make a lot of sense. And you almost had something that was Sparta, where only the strongest survive, and you can see where there's this real honor and integrity to that. And I really enjoyed it when they started doing that, and then they kind of lost it and fell back from that. But I think there are ways to have given the aliens much more 3 dimensions to them. I think that came close to happening with the Klingons. That came kind of close to happening with the Cardassians, but hasn't really happened. And I don't. Women roar, then they hurl a heavy object. What's the? yeah, that's right. Okay, Sokka's got that. So.
I gotta go with. Yeah. I gotta agree with Naka real quick. It depends on the elf. Legolas could kick Worf's ass. Like, I love Worf. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to. Phenomenal. One of my favorite characters in all of Star Trek. Legolas would absolutely wipe the floor with Worf any day of the week.
Probably, but there's 2 reasons for that. One, he could shoot him from 20 miles away before they even get to close hand. And once they got, even in close hand, he's too nimble. He's too. If Worf ever laid a hand on him, he'd be dead. But Worf couldn't. Legolas is too nimble. So are we really arguing over who could win a fight, Worf?
Yes.
Or
welcome
Legolas?
to Trek It. Yeah, that's the kind of
content
okay,
good. No,
people are here
I'm
for. Yes.
Perfect.
Sokka Count says the line is, "Women roar, they hurl heavy objects and claw at you. What do the men do? He reads love poetry. He ducks a lot."
Ducks a lot, yeah.
Oh yeah, so Knock and I were on the same page. He was thinking of Lego. Yes, totally agree.
The when Riker is aboard the Klingon vessel for the exchange, And when they did that cultural exchange, there was that one you got to see some of the culture that they were building, and when you see that they all actually have a sense of humor and that they operate very differently aboard that ship, but it works. It's not this foreign. There is an internal consistency to it. But then Riker, one of the women is one of the females, Klingon females, is looking at Riker, and she's got eyes on him, and he's like, "Why is she looking at me?" There's actually two of them, and I'd like to know how the human male would perform. I just kind of looks and goes, "One or both?" Everybody's just like, yeah. And it was Jedi. You cannot bring Jedi into this. No, foul! I cry foul on Michael West. You cannot bring Jedi into this conversation.
First of all, no. I'm sorry, Wilson. What about Devolved Worf versus Legolas? Legolas still wins against Devolved Worf. Doesn't matter. Legolas would shoot 3 arrows through his forehead before he could spit any acid on him. Sorry. Jedi takes them both out. I don't know.
No,
Luke Skywalker versus Legolas. That would be a fight.
Yeah. No. Legolas would be dead. Sorry.
He's elven magic, man. Don't discount.
Legolas
magic.
didn't have any real. No, he didn't have any real magic, and this is the Force. I mean, he throws 6 arrows. Luke just goes, does a little Neo stuff. The arrows just hang out there, and I thought he just cuts the arrows in half, and then does a Force jump, shows up there, and boom, cuts them in half. I'm sorry, no, not even. Of course, there's the move from that you saw it in the last movie, which was good. But the lightsaber move in Star Wars Online, where you can actually do the saber throw, which I love that, and the saber goes around like a boomerang and then comes back. It's like Jedi should be doing more of that. That was who had bring up.
That's a whole different conversation. But I think the beauty of the Force is when it's not used as much. I think the Force is more powerful when the Jedi don't rely on it. Anyway, that's a whole other.
I agree.
We're not getting there, but Andrew says, "Who hath committed the unpardonable sin of bringing up Star Wars concepts in a Star Trek conversation?" That was Michael Westby. You can blame Michael Westby.
Yep.
Member of my bot army, which you should join by clicking the blue join button below. Help support the channel. Thank you very much. All right, we can't do this all night. Could you shill? Well, I have to go. I have to go play video games on Twitch. I know. I gotta go do my thing. Shill for us. Tell us where people can find you and what you do.
Perfect. Well, so first of all, thank you very much for having me on your inaugural episode, the maiden voyage of this show. So thank you. My name is Nick Suter, Nicholas Lamar Suter. If you look up, I have 2 books. One was science fiction. It was actually a rebuttal to Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. It's a novel. So that's called The Water Thief. And then I co-authored a biography of a prison psychologist at Walpole Super Maximum Security Prison. He was a therapist of the worst human beings you can possibly imagine. I also host In Time, which is a YouTube channel. It is actually a couple of different shows, and we have a new co-host on Overtime, which is our news show. I don't know who that is. Some geeky Star Trek. Yeah, some geek Star Trek guy. And in fact, Ethan and Mikey were both correspondents coming on the show because the show does cover breaking news. So if something big happened, we'd call up Ethan at 2 a.m. say, "Hey, dude, I'm streaming now. You want to come on?" And he's like, "Who's this? Mom?
How did you get this number?"
And he came on, so I was like, we need a new host for the show. You want our co-host? You want to come in? It's just like, yeah, I'm not kind of stupid. Why don't I do that? So that's In Time, and that's In Time Show on YouTube and on Twitter. You can find me there. And I think other than that, in the writing, I also own and run the Humanist Codex. I haven't been doing as much of that recently, or the debates. I like to do online debates. We'll be doing actually a discussion on guns next week. We have on Christopher Mowdy ourselves. Christopher Mowdy is going to be coming on tomorrow to discuss. He's actually coming on 2 days in a row to discuss 3 new studies that have come out that said that basically, depending on if you're a viewer of Fox, a good predictor of how what your likelihood is of catching COVID is which Fox News shows you watch. So if you watch Hannity versus if you watch what's
Rachel
his name?
Maddow
Tucker Carlson. Well,
I see what you're
Maddow's
saying.
not on Fox
Gotcha.
Fox News.
Gotcha.
It also covers some of the other news organizations, but because each of them have actually handled it very differently, it has actually had, well, whether it's causal or not, we will get into. But so we'll be discussing that, and then we have on a number of series. We have a series on civics. We have a series on philosophy. Osmandius comes by, does that. Landon Knoll. So that's what I've been doing most of my time on right now is in time. We just did an interview with Matt Dillahunty on the importance of debate, which we thoroughly enjoyed, and Ethan joins us for overtime on that show, which we are very lucky to have him. Usually when
most of the time, most of the time.
Yep.
Sock Account says, I'm enjoying this conversation more than I even thought I would. In the future, can we maybe discuss specific episodes of Star Trek with deep philosophical undertones? Yes, Sokka. Some episodes of Trek It will surround just a singular episode or a singular character or just a singular theme. That's the beauty of this series. I've left it very open. So we may discuss, something about one of the series. We may discuss one of the characters, one of the episodes, all of that. If anyone has an idea for a show, you're more than welcome to bring it to me. One of the things we'll be doing with Trek It is that members of the bot army will help decide the theme of future episodes. So if you're interested in being one of the people that helps decide what future episodes of Trek It are about, click that blue join button right down below, and you'll get to join in on those conversations. Yes, so Trek It will happen every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern with a different idea, theme, whatever. Usually there will be a guest, maybe not always, but usually there will be a guest, somebody from the community, somebody that you know, or maybe somebody that you don't, who we're going to discuss a specific thing about. So make sure you're subscribed here so that you never miss an episode. And also, there's a series I started a year ago called The Politics of Star Trek. There are 2 episodes. I've begun work on episode 3 of The Politics of Star Trek, and episode 4, actually. And those will be coming soon. The format's changing a little bit. It'll be more talking head type of thing. And the way that I was doing episodes back then, my face wasn't in it. And so the theme's changing a little bit, and I'm having a little bit of... I'm trying to work out exactly how to put it together. That's what's taking so long of getting this episode 3. But it is on the way shortly. And also, join me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/prolib. I'm going to go play video games there in a little bit. And you should do that because it's a lot of fun. A lot of people from the community go over there, and you can just go over there and hang out and chat with us and play some video games. Nick, thank you so much for being here. This was fantastic.
I had a blast, and if you ever need someone to fill in, please let me know. I would love to come back. But it was
sir, you are at the top of that list. I assure you. All right, we say goodbye to Mr. Suter. There we go, and then I will say goodbye to all of you. Thank you again for watching, and we will see you all next time. Good night, everybody.